Midnight had a way of stretching time into something soft and lonely. The building's marble floors reflected the dim security lights, turning the empty corporate hallways into silver corridors that Eleanor had learned to call her second home. While the rest of the city slept, she pushed her mop in slow, rhythmic sweeps, her breath fogging faintly in the chilled air conditioning. The world above her level was spinning with money, danger, and late-night power. But she existed somewhere beneath all that, in the quiet spaces no one cared to look at. Tonight felt heavier, the silence different. She kept glancing toward the elevator as if something inside her already knew the world was about to shift. Her hands trembled slightly, though she blamed it on exhaustion. Working 2 jobs meant she hadn't slept more than a few hours in days. When the elevator chimed, its soft metallic note echoed unnaturally loud. Elena froze. No one ever came up here this late except the security guard, and he always used the stairs. She squeezed the mop handle, pulse quickening, and forced herself to turn. The doors slid open slowly, releasing a slice of warm light and a presence that disrupted the entire stillness of the hallway. A tall man stepped out, shoulders broad beneath a tailored charcoal coat, movements controlled like someone used to commanding a room with silence alone. His dark hair fell slightly over his forehead, and his jaw was sharp enough to look dangerous even in low light. But it was his eyes, storm gray, unreadable, that made her breath falter. Adrian Moretti, the owner of the building, the man whispered about in rumors, in warnings, in the tight shifts of men who worked in the shadows. A name tied to a world Elena wanted no part of. He shouldn't have been here. He shouldn't have been alone. And he definitely shouldn't have been looking at her the way he did, like her existence had interrupted something inside him. She dipped her head, stepping back with instinctual caution. "Good evening, sir." Her voice sounded painfully small compared to the weight he carried in his silence. Adrian stopped in front of her, not too close, but close enough that she felt the aura of someone who had lived through fire and learned to walk with it. The air around him felt charged. Dangerous, not because he threatened her, but because he simply existed. His gaze moved down to her hands, lingering on the mop, then drifted back up with the faintest crease in his brow. He wasn't annoyed. If anything, he looked curious. "You work late," he said. His voice was deep, roughened at the edges like a man who didn't speak more than necessary. "So do you," she tried to joke softly, but her voice wavered. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, gone before she could believe it was real. He took a step toward the window, and that's when she saw it. His cuff, dark with a stain that didn't belong in a polished corporate building. Blood. Fresh. Her. Breath caught, chest tightening as questions surged to her tongue. But she swallowed them all. Asking would be a mistake people like her didn't get to make. He noticed her stare. "It's not mine," he said quietly. Somehow, that did not make her feel any better. Still, his tone wasn't cold. If anything, it held something like reassurance, though she didn't know why a man like him would care about easing the fear of a girl scrubbing floors. Elena forced her gaze away and turned back to her bucket, hoping he would walk past and leave. She didn't belong in anyone's story, especially not his. But instead of walking away, he stood there, studying her like a puzzle he wasn't sure he should solve. "What's your name?" he asked. She blinked. "Eleanor." As soon as she said it, regret washed through her. People like him shouldn't know people like her. Names were dangerous things when spoken in the wrong world. But Adrian nodded slowly, tasting the syllables like they mattered. "Eleanor," he repeated, softer this time, as if storing it somewhere he didn't allow himself to store anything. She didn't know why the sound warmed her and scared her at the same time. She stepped aside, giving him room to pass, but he didn't move. Instead, he glanced at the clock on the wall. "Why are you here so late?" he asked, turning the question back to her. She shrugged, gripping the mop to keep her hands steady. "This is my shift." He tilted his head slightly. "Most people would quit a job that keeps them alone in a silent building at midnight. I'm not most people." "I can see that." The way he said it, low, contemplative, respectful, made her heartbeat trip. A faint hum filled the silence, and she realized it was coming from the elevator still waiting behind him. But Adrian didn't turn back to it. He watched her instead, as if trying to understand something he hadn't expected to find. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then his gaze softened, just enough to make her chest tighten. "Be careful tonight," he murmured, almost like a warning he didn't want to give. "Why?" she whispered before she could stop herself. A shadow flickered through his expression. "Because people like me shouldn't be here at this hour." Before she could respond, he stepped back into the elevator, the doors closing between them with a quiet metallic sigh. She stared at the empty hallway, feeling the air shift as if something had passed through her world and left an imprint she couldn't erase. Her fingers trembled as she picked up the mop again. The silence felt different now, charged, as if the building itself had woken up. She forced herself to continue cleaning, but her thoughts tangled with questions she shouldn't ask. Why had he bled? Why had he looked at her like he recognized a piece of himself in her? And why did she suddenly feel the strangest sense that their paths were never meant to cross? Yet something had pulled them together anyway. As she dipped the mop into the bucket, the elevator chimed again in the distance. She didn't turn, but she felt it. A shift in fate, a spark, a thread tightening around her life in ways she couldn't understand yet. Midnight had always been quiet. Tonight, it felt like the beginning of something dangerous. And destiny was watching from the shadows. Eleanor tried to pretend nothing had changed after that night, but the memory of Adrian Moretti stepping out of the elevator followed her like a soft echo she couldn't shut out. She returned for her next shift with the same worn jacket, the same tired steps, the same routine she'd been living for months. But the building no longer felt the same. The hallways felt aware of her, as if the silence now carried eyes. And though she didn't want to admit it, part of her kept waiting for the soft metallic chime of the elevator again. But he didn't appear the next night, or the night after. She told herself it was good. Men like him moved in worlds lined with danger and blood. Worlds that had nothing to do with a girl pushing a mop through corridors meant for people wealthier, louder, and far more important than she would ever be. Keeping her head down had always kept her safe. "Look up too often," her mother once told her, "and you'll meet trouble more quickly than love." So Elena became quieter. She moved through her tasks with mechanical precision, avoiding reflective surfaces where she might accidentally catch her own anxious expression. But even with her eyes focused on her work, she felt him lingering in the corners of her thoughts. His low voice, the way he'd said her name, the strange concern softening a man who shouldn't have known gentleness. By the fourth night, exhaustion had settled behind her eyes like a bruise. She was wiping down one of the glass conference rooms when she heard footsteps. Soft, measured, not rushed like the security guard, not random like late employees. These footsteps carried intent. She stiffened, breath-catching, as a shadow stretched across the glass. She knew it before she turned. She had already felt the air shift. Adrian Moretti was standing in the doorway. He wasn't wearing a coat tonight, just a fitted black shirt with the sleeves rolled halfway up, revealing faint scars along his forearm. Thin white marks like old memories carved into skin. His presence filled the room instantly. Not loud or imposing, just quiet power. The kind that demanded attention without asking for it. Elena's throat tightened. She focused on the cloth in her hand, wiping the glass again even though it was already spotless. She didn't look up. She didn't trust herself if she did. "I didn't expect you to avoid me." His voice was calm, almost casual, but something beneath it hinted at curiosity. Maybe even a touch of offense. She swallowed. "I'm not avoiding you. I'm just working." "You never look up," he murmured. Her hand stilled. He took a slow step closer, not enough to invade her space, but enough to feel the shift of air between them. "Every night you walk the halls like a ghost, eyes down, shoulders tense, as if the world will collapse if you lift your gaze." "I'm just trying to keep my job," she whispered. "I'm not going to fire you. That's what worries me." This time she did look up, just for a second, and instantly wished she hadn't. His eyes locked with hers, sharp and searching, as if every hidden truth inside her was something he could read with ease. Adrian studied her quietly. "You're afraid of me." She held her breath. "Shouldn't I be?" He exhaled through his nose, a sound not quite a laugh. "Most people are. But you looked me in the eye that first night, even when you saw the blood." "That doesn't mean I wasn't scared. It means you have courage," he said, voice deepening. "More than most." Her chest warmed in a way she didn't want to acknowledge. She turned quickly and continued wiping the glass to hide the tremor in her fingers. Adrian didn't move, simply watched her as though she were a story unfolding at its own pace. "You come here every night at the same time," she said quietly, trying to shift the attention away from herself. "Why?" His jaw flexed, shadows crossing his expression. "I have work to finish." "At midnight?" "At all hours," he corrected. "My life doesn't allow rest." Something in his tone held weight, an exhaustion deeper than sleepless nights. Eleanor felt it without needing him to explain. She wanted to ask more, but stayed silent. Curiosity was dangerous around men like him. After a moment, he spoke again. "You hum." She blinked. "I... What?" "When you clean," he said, softer now. "A little tune. Same every night?" Her face warmed with embarrassment. She didn't think anyone heard her. She only hummed to stay awake, to keep loneliness from swallowing her whole. "I didn't realize," she murmured. "I did." His voice dipped lower. "It's peaceful." The word sounded foreign coming from him, as if he wasn't used to speaking it aloud. Elena finally lowered the cloth, turning to face him fully. "Why are you noticing these things?" His answer came without hesitation. "Because you're different." The silence that followed was fragile, charged with something unspoken. She didn't know what made her chest tighten more, his attention or the fear of what his attention meant. But before she could respond, a noise echoed from down the hallway. Sharp, metallic, sudden. Eleanor flinched. Adrian's entire body shifted instantly, posture tense, gaze sliding to the doorway like a predator reading danger. He listened. Every muscle in him stilled. Then slowly the tension eased, though his eyes remained cold, focused, alert. "Just Luca," he muttered. "My head of security." Eleanor didn't understand why knowing his guard was close should comfort her. But somehow, it did. Adrian turned back to her. His voice softened again, but the edge of warning remained. "You shouldn't wander alone on this floor. Not anymore." "Why? What's changed?" His gaze held hers with a weight that made her heart skip. "The moment you saw me bleed, Elena, your world brushed against mine." She felt the truth of it even if she didn't know what it meant. He stepped back, giving her space, though the gravity of him lingered. "Be careful," he said again, quieter this time. "Some people notice the girl who never looks up." Her breath caught as he disappeared down the hall, footsteps fading into the darkness. Only after he was gone did she allow herself to exhale. The building felt emptier than ever, yet she couldn't shake the strange warmth in her chest, or the deeper fear beneath it. She knew now. Adrian Moretti wasn't just a man who walked out of an elevator at midnight. He was a shift in her fate. And fate had started watching her very, very closely. Elena didn't intend to return to the top floor the next night, but habit guided her feet before her thoughts could catch up. Routine had always been her shield. Predictable steps, quiet movements, no surprises. Yet now every echo of her footsteps felt louder, as if the building remembered what had passed between her and Adrian Moretti and waited for more. She told herself she wouldn't look for him. She told herself she wouldn't care if he appeared or didn't. But when she reached the wide hallway outside his office and found the lights already on, her breath faltered. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of warm light spilling into the otherwise cold corridor. For a long moment she stood there, unsure if she should enter. But then his voice drifted out, calm, quiet, almost gentle. "Eleanor, you can come in." A shiver ran down her spine. He had sensed her without seeing her. She nudged the door open, stepping inside with the cautious steps. Adrian was seated at his desk, sleeves rolled up again, fingers tracing across documents scattered in careful disarray. But he looked up immediately, the faintest warmth flickering across his expression as though he'd been waiting. The office felt different tonight, less like the lair of a powerful man, and more like a storm kept barely at bay. "You're early," he said. She shook her head. "I'm on time." "Early for me," he clarified, a faint curve touching his lips. She glanced away, setting down her cleaning supplies. "I wasn't planning on interrupting anything." "You're not interrupting." His voice softened, steady. "In fact, I prefer when you're here." The words caught her off guard. She didn't know what to do with them, so she folded her hands and looked at the floor. But he wasn't finished. "I want you to clean this floor first," he said. "Every night from now on." Her head snapped up. "Why?" His eyes met hers with a seriousness that made her pulse quicken. "Because I don't like being alone up here." She didn't believe that fully, not from a man who seemed built from solitude. But the quiet sincerity behind his tone left no room to argue. Against her better judgment, she nodded and lifted the mop. For the next hour, they existed in a rhythm she didn't expect to find comforting. He worked. She cleaned. But he wasn't silent. Not tonight. Every so often he asked her small questions, gentle ones that threaded themselves carefully into the spaces she usually kept locked away. "How long have you worked here?" "Do you live far from the city?" "Do you always hum when you focus?" Her cheeks warmed each time, but he didn't tease. His questions held genuine curiosity, as though the smallest details mattered to him more than they should. Eventually, he stood and crossed to the window. The city lights glowed below like scattered embers. "You know," he murmured, "most people would use a job like this as a stepping stone. Something temporary. Something they could leave behind." "I don't have many options," she said softly, placing her mop aside. "That's not true." He turned to her. "You're smart, careful, observant. You carry yourself like someone who's learned to survive more than she admits." Her breath stilled. She didn't like how easily his words peeled back layers she worked hard to cover. She tried to shrug it off. "You don't know anything about me." "I want to," he said, almost under his breath. The words settled between them, fragile and dangerous. Before Eleanor could respond, the door opened abruptly. Lucas stepped in, broad-shouldered, sharp-eyed, his expression darkening when he saw her. "Boss," he said with a tone that wasn't quite respectful, "we need to discuss the dockside situation." Adrian didn't look away from Elena. Later? Luca stiffened. But I said later. Luca's jaw clenched, and for a moment, Elena felt something electric shift in the room. Then he stepped back out, closing the door quietly. She swallowed hard. He doesn't like me being here. Adrian walked toward her, slow and deliberate, stopping a few feet away, close enough for her to feel the quiet force of him. That isn't your problem, he said. Luca worries too much. He thinks I'm a distraction. Are you? The question held an edge she didn't know how to navigate. She forced herself to meet his gaze. I'm just doing my job. Something softened in his eyes, but it was gone too quickly to read. He walked past her to the table near the far wall, poured himself a glass of water, and then glanced back. Elena, he said quietly, you don't have to be afraid of me. Her voice trembled as she answered, I don't think I'm afraid of you. No, he agreed, studying her carefully. You're afraid of what? Being near me might cost you. Her breath hitched, not because she disagreed, but because he was right. He set the glass down, taking a slow step closer. I don't want anything bad to touch you, not from my world, not from me. But it already has, she whispered. That night. The blood? It wasn't mine, he said again, though this time his voice carried something darker, something like regret. But it was from a fight that never should have happened, and you shouldn't have seen it. I wasn't supposed to, she said. No, he murmured, but fate has an odd sense of timing. His gaze held hers, steady, as though silently promising a truth he didn't yet speak. And though she stood still, she felt the ground beneath her shift again, subtle but undeniable. She didn't know why being near him didn't terrify her the way it should. She only knew the strange safety she felt wasn't real, couldn't be real, and yet it wrapped around her like a quiet shield. He stepped back finally, giving her space to breathe. Finish up here. I'll be in the back office if you need anything. As he turned away, Elena watched his silhouette retreat into the shadows, feeling something inside her tighten. She didn't understand the pull between them, didn't want to understand it. But she couldn't ignore it. She returned to her cleaning, though her thoughts no longer moved in straight lines. Every sweep of the mop felt like a step deeper into a world she didn't belong in, yet somehow couldn't step away from. Adrian Moretti had offered her a strange safety tonight. But safety in a man like him was only the calm before the storm. The next night slipped into the building like a held breath, the kind that lingered too long in the air. Elena stepped off the service elevator with her usual quiet steps, but everything inside her felt different. She'd spent the entire day replaying Adrian's words, the strange gentleness behind them, the way he had looked at her as if she were something he wasn't sure he deserved to touch. It unnerved her. It warmed her. It made her feel seen and unsafe in equal measure. She told herself she wasn't expecting him to be there. But when she reached his floor and found the lights dim, the office doors closed. A small ache pulsed behind her ribs. Maybe it was better this way. Maybe she needed distance before her curiosity dragged her into something she couldn't walk away from. She set down her cleaning cart and got to work, moving slowly, letting the rhythmic sweep of the mop steady her heartbeat. By the time she reached the large glass windows overlooking the sleeping city, a low rumble of distant thunder shivered through the sky. The forecast had promised heavy rain, and the first droplets tapped the glass like small, impatient fingers. She liked rain. It drowned the noise of her thoughts. The storm had only just begun when the building lights flickered, dimmed, then surged back to life. Elena paused, unsettled. Seconds later they flickered again, this time longer, enough to make her heart beat harder. Then darkness swallowed the entire floor. A soft gasp escaped her. She stood completely still, fingers tightening around the mop handle. The storm's growl vibrated through the windows. Emergency lights clicked on in the hallway, a faint red glow barely illuminating the corridor. Shadows stretched long and thin, reshaping the familiar into something quieter, heavier, almost unreal. Elena? His voice came from somewhere behind her, warm despite the darkness. She turned sharply, pulse jumping, and saw Adrian approaching through the dimness, his silhouette cutting clean lines through the emergency light. I didn't mean to, she swallowed. I didn't know someone else was up here. I know. He stepped closer. The power's out on the upper floors. Backup generators will kick in soon. Until then. He stopped in front of her, close but not close enough to alarm her. His eyes held the faintest reflection of the emergency lights, softening the storm gray into something almost human. You don't have to stay in the dark, he said quietly. Come with me. Elena hesitated. She shouldn't follow him, she told herself. Not into shadowed hallways, not into spaces that felt too intimate. But the storm crackled again. The building trembled faintly, and something about his voice, steady, low, familiar now, made the fear inside her settle just a little. He led her toward the smaller break room attached to his office. It wasn't fancy like the rest of the floor, just a small counter, an old coffee maker, a kettle, a few shelves. Adrian lit a battery-powered lamp he must have kept there for emergencies, the soft glow casting warmth into the space. You're shaking, he murmured. I'm fine, she said quickly, though her voice betrayed her. He didn't challenge her lie. Instead, he reached for the kettle, filled it with bottled water, and set it to heat on a portable burner. The flame flickered gently, adding another warm glow to the storm-dark room. You drink coffee, don't you? He asked without looking at her. She blinked. How do you know that? You come in at midnight every night. I'd collapse without caffeine. Her lips parted, surprised by the simple humor. I do? Sometimes. He glanced over his shoulder. Tonight seems like a good night for it. She didn't argue. Something about the storm outside made the moment feel suspended, like time had slowed just for them. Adrian prepared 2 mugs with careful hands, movements oddly tender for someone whose knuckles still bore faint shadows of bruises. When he handed her the mug, his fingers brushed hers. Barely a second of contact. But it sent warmth rushing through her like a secret she wasn't supposed to feel. Thank you, she whispered. He didn't answer immediately. He watched her. Instead, as she lifted the cup to her lips, steam curling against her face, the warmth seeped into her palms, into her chest, easing the tension she'd carried from the moment she stepped onto the floor. The rain hit harder now, sheets of water streaking the windows outside the break room. Thunder rolled deep and distant, like something ancient stirring in the dark. You shouldn't be here alone during storms, Adrian said quietly. I've worked through worse. That doesn't make it right. Elena lowered her gaze. It's just a job. Someone has to clean the floors. But it doesn't have to be you at midnight. His voice thickened. Someone should have protected you long before this. Confusion tightened her chest. Protected me from what? He hesitated, choosing his words with care. From the kind of life that teaches a girl to keep her head down. From landlords who leave bruises on her arm. From a world that forgets her. Her breath caught. She hadn't realized he'd noticed the bruise so clearly. You shouldn't know things like that, she murmured. And yet I do. His honesty pulled something raw inside her. She looked away, focusing on the steam rising from her mug. You watch me too closely, she said softly. I can't help it. The confession hung between them, fragile and dangerous. Adrian leaned back against the counter, crossing his arms. He looked almost relaxed, though tension rippled beneath the surface, like a man used to holding his emotions behind steel doors. "I'm not used to quiet," he admitted, "or to people who don't flinch when I walk into a room." "I didn't say I don't flinch." "You flinch at the world," he corrected gently. "Not at me." She didn't know how to answer that. She didn't know how to explain that the only reason she didn't fear him was because something in his presence made her feel safe, despite everything she knew she shouldn't feel. The storm raged outside, but inside the small break room, everything felt suspended. Still, warm, and strangely intimate. Adrian looked toward the window, the faint light outlining the sharp angles of his face. "Do you hear that?" "The storm?" "No." His gaze softened. "It's the first time this place has felt alive in years." Her breath trembled, not because of the storm, but because of the meaning inside his words. She sipped the coffee again, letting the warmth settle her heart. Adrian watched her quietly, as if the simple act of sharing a cup of coffee at 2 a.m. meant more to him than he'd ever admit aloud. The lights flickered once more, stronger this time, signaling the generators coming back online. The hum of electricity returned to the building, steady and predictable. The moment was ending. But as the room brightened, Adrian didn't move back. He looked at her as though he wished the power had stayed out just a little longer. "Elena," he said, softly, "be careful going home tonight." "I will." "And," his voice lowered, "if you ever need a place to feel safe, you know where to find me." She didn't know why her heart ached at his words, only that they felt like the beginning of something she wasn't ready for. When she finally stepped back into the hallway, her coffee still warm in her hands, she felt the strange truth settle inside her. Tonight, she had seen a different side of Adrian Moretti. And for the first time, she feared not the danger he carried, but the way he was slowly becoming a sanctuary she couldn't afford to trust. The storm had passed by the time Elena returned the next night, but something of its electricity still lingered inside her. She told herself it was nothing, that sharing coffee with Adrian at 2 a.m. had been an accident created by a power outage and a moment of weakness. Yet as she stepped into the now brightly lit hallway, her heart tightened in a way she couldn't ignore. The building felt different again, as if it remembered the quiet warmth they had shared and was waiting for whatever would follow. She began cleaning in silence, hoping to avoid him, needing distance she didn't quite understand how to take. But as she passed his office door, she saw him through the glass, leaning over his desk, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly mussed like he'd been running his hand through it too often. He looked lost in thought, burdened by things he carried alone. She quickened her pace, but before she reached the elevators, his voice drifted down the hall. "Elena?" She froze. His tone wasn't commanding. It was softer, almost hesitant. Against her better judgment, she turned. Adrian stood in the doorway, watching her as though he feared she might vanish if he blinked. He stepped toward her, stopping a few feet away, as if careful not to push her too close to the shadows of his world. "Are you free after your shift?" he asked quietly. Her stomach tightened. "Why?" He hesitated, not for lack of words, but for choosing the right ones. "I want to take you somewhere safe, somewhere quiet." She shook her head before she could stop herself. "I can't accept things like that. I shouldn't." "Why not? It's just dinner." "Nothing with you is just anything." His breath stilled. For a moment something flickered through his eyes, something that looked like guilt, or fear, or both. "Elena," he said slowly, "I'm not asking as Adrian Moretti. I'm asking as a man who hasn't wanted someone's company in a very long time." Her chest tightened painfully at the honesty in his voice. "I don't belong in your world," she whispered. I'm trying to leave that world, he answered, one step at a time. She searched his face, trying to decide what was truth and what was hope disguised as words. But there was something in his expression she couldn't ignore. A kind of vulnerability she'd never expect from a man like him. Finally, she exhaled. Where would we go? A faint, almost relieved smile touched his lips. You'll see. He waited for her to finish her shift, watching from a respectful distance, silent but present. She felt his gaze on her, steady, warm, curious, but never intrusive. When she finally put away her supplies, he approached with careful steps. Ready? Not really, she admitted, his voice lowered. Neither am I. Outside, the city glittered with the remnants of rain, streetlights reflecting in puddles like small pieces of stolen moonlight. Adrian led her to a sleek black car waiting at the curb. The driver opened the door, but Adrian shook his head. I'll drive. The driver stepped aside without argument. Eleanor hesitated before sliding into the passenger seat, her heart pounding in uneven beats. Adrian settled beside her, his presence filling the small space with quiet strength. The ride was silent at first, the engine humming softly as they slipped through empty streets. She watched the city blur past, lights streaking across the windows like faint memories. You're quiet tonight, he said after a moment. So are you? He glanced at her, the corner of his mouth lifting faintly. Maybe we're both nervous. She looked at him in disbelief. You? Nervous? He kept his eyes on the road. More than I'd like to be. The admission settled into her like warmth she didn't want to feel, but couldn't push away. They drove toward a part of the city she had never seen before. Quiet streets lined with old buildings and iron lanterns. Adrian parked outside a small hidden restaurant with frosted windows and no sign. It didn't look like the kind of place ordinary people knew existed. Elena swallowed. Is this safe? He opened her door gently. The safest place in the city for you. Inside, the restaurant was warm, candlelit, and nearly empty. A single violin played softly in the background, weaving through the room like a delicate lullaby. The staff greeted Adrian with respect. Not fear, not formality, but something else entirely. Something deeper. They were escorted to a private corner booth where the light was soft and the air smelled faintly of rosemary and rain. Elena sat slowly, nervousness twisting in her stomach. She traced the edge of her napkin to steady her hands. You don't bring people here often, she said. Adrian's gaze lingered on her face, softer than she'd ever seen it. I've never brought anyone here. Her breath caught. He leaned back, studying the candlelight flickering against her features. This place was my father's favorite. He said candlelight made the world gentler. I think he was right. You don't talk about him much. He doesn't deserve many words. Adrian paused, voice tightening. But he taught me some things, like how a quiet night can feel like a sanctuary when everything else falls apart. Eleanor looked down, unsure how to hold the weight of his honesty. Why did you bring me here? His answer was soft, raw. Because when I'm near you, I feel like I can breathe. The words struck her like a tremor beneath the ribs, unexpected, dangerous, and impossibly sincere. She opened her mouth to speak, but a movement across the restaurant caught her eye. A man at the far table, face half hidden by shadow, watched them with sharp interest. Eleanor stiffened, her fingers curling into her lap. Adrian followed her gaze. The softness in him vanished. His entire posture changed, shoulders tensing, jaw tightening, something lethal awakening behind his eyes. He placed a slow hand on the table, poised, controlled. Eleanor, he whispered without looking away from the man. Don't turn your head. Just listen to me. Her heartbeat thundered. She kept her eyes down. That man, Adrian continued quietly, belongs to someone who would do anything to find a weakness in me. Why is he watching us? She breathed. Because he thinks he's found one. Eleanor felt her heart stop. Adrian leaned closer, not threatening, but protective. His voice a low promise against the rising storm inside her. You are not my weakness, he murmured, but they will think you are. She swallowed hard, fear and something deeper twisting inside her. What does that mean? His gaze lifted to hers, shadowed with something heavy and inevitable. It means, he whispered, I shouldn't have brought you here tonight. But his voice held a truth even stronger. He didn't regret it. Not for a moment. The drive back from the restaurant was quieter than the way there, but the silence felt heavier now, filled with questions, fear, and the echo of the stranger's watchful eyes. Rain had started again, light and steady, tapping against the car like a whispered warning. Eleanor sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, trying to calm the tremor beneath her skin. Adrian's grip on the steering wheel was steady, but she could feel the storm underneath it. Not anger. Something older, deeper, woven from memories he didn't speak of. Every line of his jaw was etched with tension, every breath calculated. I'm sorry, he said softly, eyes still on the road. For what? Her voice barely rose above the hum of the engine. For bringing you somewhere you weren't ready to see. A pause. Somewhere my past could reach you? She swallowed hard. Who was that man? Someone who belongs to a family that doesn't forget old wounds, he murmured. People who look for any opening to strike. And I'm an opening? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled the car into a quiet street behind the building. The soft glow of the street lamp painting shadows across his profile. Only then did he turn toward her, and the weight in his gaze made her breath falter. That man wasn't watching you, Adrian said. He was watching me. You were just a way to hurt you, she whispered. He closed his eyes briefly, jaw tightening. A potential way. She looked down at her hands. They felt too small, too fragile in comparison to the world she had glimpsed tonight. I'm nobody, she said softly. Why would they look at me like I'm anything? Adrian leaned back, exhaling slowly. His voice dropped to something raw. My past doesn't sleep, Elena, and it doesn't care who you are. It only cares who you are to me. Her heart stumbled. She didn't know what she was to him. A distraction? A moment of quiet? A person he felt strangely protective of? Nothing made sense, yet everything inside her tightened with a mixture of fear and something that felt dangerously like longing. He ran a hand through his hair, the headlights catching the silver of old scars across his knuckles. I've done things, he said quietly. Things I don't want you to ever know. Things I'm trying to walk away from. She hesitated, then whispered, Because of them? Because of everyone, he said, voice low. My father built an empire that rotted from the inside. He taught me power was survival. Violence was control. Loyalty was bought in blood, and I inherited all of it, his enemies, his debts, his shadows. He paused, looking out through the rain-streaked windshield, the city lights reflecting like small ghosts. When he died, they didn't mourn him. They sharpened their knives and turned them toward me. Her breath trembled. So you kept going. You stepped into his world. I had no choice, he murmured. Too many people depended on stability. Too many families would have been torn apart if a vacuum formed. But every day I stayed, it cost me a little more. She found herself leaning slightly closer, her voice barely a breath. Then why now? Why try to leave? His eyes met hers, storm gray and unguarded. Because the first time I realized I might want something outside of the life was the night you looked me in the eye. Her chest tightened, but she couldn't speak. Not yet. He continued, voice softer. You didn't flinch. You didn't look at me the way the world does. You saw me bleed, Elena. And you didn't run. I was scared, she whispered. But you didn't run, he repeated, as if that truth mattered more to him than any other. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know what she should say. So instead, she asked the only question she could manage. Do you regret taking me to that restaurant? No, he said immediately, with a certainty that shook her. But I regret that my world touched you. I regret that you now know there are eyes watching. She felt his regret, not as weakness, but as the kind that only comes from carrying too much alone. Adrian, she said slowly, you don't have to tell me everything. I'm not asking. I know, he murmured. That's what terrifies me. The hum of the engine faded as he turned it off, leaving them wrapped in the quiet of rain and distant traffic. Neither moved for a long moment. Finally, he reached for the door handle, pausing just before stepping out. Let me walk you inside. It's late, she whispered. You don't have to. I do. His voice deepened. Whether you want me to or not. He walked her to the service entrance, rain catching in his hair, the night air holding that electric stillness that follows a storm. When they reached the doorway, she turned to thank him, but the words tangled in her chest. He looked down at her gently, searching her expression with a tenderness she wasn't prepared for. Are you frightened of me? He asked. No, she said truthfully. Just of what being near you means. A muscle worked in his jaw, but he stepped back instead of closer. I understand. She reached for the door, then hesitated. Adrian, what will happen now? He didn't lie. He didn't offer comfort he couldn't guarantee. Instead, he answered in the quiet tone of a man preparing for a storm he couldn't avoid. Now, he murmured, my past will test how far I'm willing to go to protect what I care about. Her breath caught. And what is it that you care about? He didn't blink. You. The word was soft, dangerous, and honest in a way that made her heart tremble. Before she could speak, he stepped back into the rain, shadows gathering around him. Elena, he said, voice steady despite everything. Be careful. My past may not sleep, but it pays attention. Then he walked into the night, leaving her standing at the doorway with the truth echoing through her chest. She was no longer invisible, and the world he came from had begun to notice. Eleanor returned to work the following night with a heaviness in her steps, the echo of Adrian's confession still tangled in her chest. You. That single word had pressed itself into her thoughts all day, unsettling everything she believed about distance and safety. She replayed the dinner, the stranger's stare, the quiet fear in Adrian's voice when he spoke of his past reaching for her. She kept trying to convince herself it wasn't real, that she misunderstood, that she was imagining danger where there was none. But the unease clung to her anyway. The building was quieter than usual, as if holding its breath. Even the security guard who usually nodded at her gave her a stiff look, one that seemed more cautious than friendly. She tried not to overthink it. She needed the job. She needed the money. And she needed to keep her world simple. But when she reached the top floor, she knew simplicity was already gone. The hallway lights were brighter than normal, harsh and cold, illuminating every corner as though the building itself expected trouble. Adrian's door was closed, but she could sense him behind it, an intuition she didn't know she possessed until now. The tension in the air felt like a wire pulled too tight. She tried to focus on her tasks, wiping surfaces, emptying bins, keeping her head down. Yet her mind drifted constantly, caught in fragments of last night. My past will test how far I'm willing to go to protect what I care about. You. Her breath hitched at the memory, and she shook her head quickly, trying to break free from the thought. But before she could ground herself again, the elevator chimed. And this time, the sound did not feel gentle. Eleanor looked up instinctively. The elevator doors slid open slowly, but it wasn't Adrian who stepped out. Two men in dark suits moved down the hallway with calculated steps, their eyes sharp and uninviting. They didn't look at her directly, but their presence ignited a warning deep in her chest. She lowered her gaze immediately, pretending to wipe a nearby desk. Their footsteps faded, then stopped at Adrian's office. The faint murmur of male voices drifted through the closed door, low, tense, and clipped. She couldn't make out the words, but she didn't need to. Something was wrong. A few minutes later, the men left as silently as they came, their suits dripping faint hostility. One glanced at her briefly, enough for her blood to run cold, before they stepped into the elevator and disappeared. Eleanor forced herself to keep working, though her hands trembled so badly she smudged more lines on the glass than she cleaned. She tried to tell herself they were business associates, clients, lawyers, anyone but men from the world Adrian tried to walk away from. But the unease in her stomach told her otherwise, and she wanted nothing more than to go home and crawl under her blanket until the feeling passed. She was reaching for her cart when the door behind her opened quietly. "Elena." She turned, breath catching. Adrian stood in the doorway, expression unreadable, tension radiating from his posture. His tie was gone, top buttons undone, hair slightly unruly, as if he'd run a hand through it out of frustration. But it was his eyes that froze her. They held the same restrained storm she'd seen in him at the restaurant, the one he couldn't hide no matter how composed he tried to appear. "You shouldn't be on this floor tonight," he said. Her heart tightened. "I work here, Adrian. I can't just disappear." "You can, if I tell you to." She stiffened. "You don't own me." He blinked, taken aback. Then he exhaled, the sharp edges in his tone softening. "I know. I didn't mean it that way. I just..." He hesitated, searching for words. "Things are fragile right now? Because of last night?" "Because of everything," he murmured. "Because they're watching. Because they're waiting for a reason to strike." She swallowed hard. "Did those men?" "Yes," he said before she could finish. "They came to warn me. Or provoke me. Probably both." Her heartbeat thudded painfully. She didn't want to be part of this. She didn't want to be a reason someone knocked on his door with threats disguised as business. "Adrian," she whispered, "maybe I should stay away for a while." His expression darkened instantly. "No." "You said your past would test you," she continued softly. "Maybe giving distance will help." "I don't want distance." "It's not about what you want," she said, voice trembling. "It's about what's safe." He looked at her with an intensity that stole the breath from her lungs. "Elena, nothing in my life is safe, but I would never let harm touch you." She wanted to believe him, but how could she when the shadows he lived with walked freely into his office? Before she could respond, a loud crack shattered the air. Glass exploded. Eleanor screamed and ducked, instinctively covering her head as shards rained down from the office window. The sound echoed through the floor, sharp, violent, unmistakable. A gunshot. Adrian lunged for her, pulling her into his chest with fierce urgency. His arms wrapped around her, shielding her completely as he forced them both behind the wall. She felt his heartbeat pounding against her cheek, steady but furious. His breath brushed her ear, low and controlled despite the violence that had just erupted. "It's okay," he whispered, though nothing was okay. "I've got you." Her pulse raced in terror, the world narrowing to his arms, his voice, the sharp sting of glass on the floor. Someone had fired directly into his office. "Adrian," she breathed, shaking. "Was that meant for—" "Yes," he said before she could finish. "But they knew exactly when to fire, exactly when the window wouldn't hit me." He pulled back slightly, eyes burning. "It wasn't a kill shot, Eleanor. It was a message." Her stomach twisted. "A warning," she whispered. "A warning," he repeated, jaw tight. "For me, for you, for both of us." She felt her legs weaken. The reality of the danger crashed over her, no longer soft or distant, but loud and undeniable. She was trembling so violently he steadied her with both hands. "I can't do this," she choked out. "I can't be part of this." He closed his eyes as though the words physically hurt. "Elena." "No," she whispered. "I'm scared, and I can't pretend I'm not." His grip loosened, but the pain in his expression deepened. A silent, devastating heartbreak. "I'm trying to leave this life," he said, voice raw. "But nights like this remind me that it won't let go easily." Her eyes filled with tears she tried to hold back. "And I'm caught in the middle." He didn't deny it. He couldn't. He looked at her with a quiet desperation, as if searching for words that didn't exist. "Eleanor," he whispered, "I never wanted you in harm's way." "But I am," she said, voice breaking. "Just by being near you." The truth settled between them like falling glass. She stepped back from his arms. He didn't stop her. He only watched, helpless, as the first crack in their fragile connection began to split open. The beginning of heartbreak neither of them knew how to stop. The shattered glass was cleaned by morning, but the memory of it clung to Eleanor like dust that refused to wash off. She took the next night off, something she'd never done before, and told her supervisor she was sick. It wasn't entirely a lie. Her chest felt tight. Her breath came uneven. And every time she closed her eyes, she heard the gunshot again, felt Adrian's arms around her, felt the terror pressing against her throat. She didn't sleep that night. Or the next? For 7 days, she avoided the building entirely. Every evening, she stared at her uniform hanging on the back of the door, wondering how something so ordinary could now feel like a doorway to danger. She made tea she didn't drink, paced across the small apartment until her feet ached, and tried to convince herself that stepping away was the right choice, the only choice. But her thoughts betrayed her. Every time she tried to push Adrian from her mind, he returned. His quiet voice, the way he shielded her, the regret in his eyes when she pulled away. She had never known someone to protect her the way he did. She had never known someone whose presence could make her feel both safe and endangered in the same breath. She wished she didn't miss him. She wished her chest didn't tighten every time her phone stayed silent, every time the night passed without a knock or a message or anything to break the distance she had created. But Adrian respected her silence. And somehow, that hurt more than the danger ever had. On the 4th night, she found herself standing near her window long after midnight, watching the city lights blink in the rain. She wondered where he was, whether he was safe, whether he had gone back to that restaurant, whether he regretted ever stepping out of that elevator and meeting a girl who cleaned floors for a living. She told herself she didn't want answers, but her heart whispered otherwise. By the 6th night, exhaustion pulled at her like a weight. Her landlord shouting in the hallway felt louder. Her double shifts at her morning job drained her, and she caught herself humming the same soft tune she hummed while cleaning, something she hadn't realized she'd missed. Routine, safety, midnight quiet, even him. On the 7th night, she forced herself to return. It wasn't bravery. It was survival. She needed the job. She needed the income. and she couldn't let fear steal her livelihood the way it tried to steal her sleep. As she entered the building, her heart raced so hard it felt like a drum in her chest. She expected the security guard to greet her, but he only offered a stiff nod, his eyes lingering on her longer than usual. She didn't know whether it was concern or suspicion. When the elevator doors opened, she hesitated, wondering if every step upward would carry her closer to something she wasn't ready to face. But she pressed the button anyway. The elevator hummed softly, rising floor by floor until the doors slid open onto the familiar hallway. It looked exactly the same. It felt nothing like before. Lights glowed softly overhead. The polished floors reflected her hesitant footsteps. But the air was different. Thicker, charged, aware. Her eyes drifted automatically toward Adrian's office, half expecting to see him through the glass, leaning against the desk, waiting. The office was dark. She exhaled, a mixture of relief and disappointment settling into her bones. Her supervisor had left a note on her card. "Top floor is still your assignment. Let me know if you need anything." She wondered if he knew about the gunshot, if he had been told to keep quiet, if the building had whispered rumors about the night Elena should never have witnessed. She tried to push the thoughts aside and started cleaning, focusing on the familiar rhythm. Sweep, wipe, spray, breathe. Her hands moved automatically, but her mind did not. At every small sound she flinched. Every echo of the air vents made her skin prickle. She was wiping down a conference table when she noticed something subtle. One of the security cameras near the ceiling had turned. Only slightly, but enough to face her. Her heart skipped. Someone was watching. She forced herself to keep moving, pretending she hadn't noticed. The camera didn't move again, but she felt eyes on her, a silent presence following her around the room. She whispered under her breath, "Adrian." Her voice vanished into the silence. She didn't expect an answer, but her pulse quickened anyway. She finished the rest of the room quickly, avoiding looking directly at any camera. By the time she pushed her cart into the hallway again, her hands were trembling. She turned the corner and stopped. Something rested on the floor near Adrian's office door, a small, folded note. Her breath caught as she approached it, her steps cautious, slow, as if it might vanish if she moved too quickly. She bent down and picked it up. Her fingers shook as she unfolded the paper. There was only one line, written in a familiar, steady hand. "I'm glad you came back." Her throat tightened. She stood in the hallway staring at the note for a long time, the words sinking into her chest like a quiet heartbeat. He knew she would return before she knew it herself. Or maybe he hoped. Maybe he watched every night, waiting for her silhouette to appear again. She pressed the paper against her chest, closing her eyes. That was when a soft click echoed across the hallway. The office door opened. She spun around, breath caught in her throat. Adrian stood there, tired, unshaven, and still heartbreakingly composed. His eyes met hers instantly, as if he had been standing on the other side of the door for hours, holding on to hope and fear in equal measure. "Elena," he breathed, voice deeper than she remembered. "You're safe." It was such a simple word, but coming from him, it trembled with relief. She opened her mouth, unsure what would come out. Anger, sorrow, accusation, longing. She didn't know. But he stepped closer, slowly, gently, as if afraid she might disappear again. "I didn't reach out," he said quietly, "because I didn't want to push you. I didn't want to drag you closer to something you needed space from." Her chest tightened painfully. "A gunshot isn't space, Adrian. It's a warning." "I know." His voice cracked just slightly, barely enough to notice. "And every night you stayed away, I felt it. She swallowed, unable to look away from him. He hesitated, then added with a painful softness, "But you came back." Elena exhaled, the week of silence collapsing around her like a wall finally giving way. "Yes," she whispered, voice trembling. "I came back." And for the first time in 7 nights, something inside her finally breathed. But the danger outside their fragile connection hadn't faded. It had simply been waiting for her return. For 3 nights after her return, Elena worked quietly, carefully, promising herself she would stay distant even as her heart betrayed her with every glance Adrian gave her. Their conversations were shorter, safer, held at the edges of hallways or in the space between his office door and her cleaning cart. He respected the fragile line she drew, never crossing it, never pushing. But she still felt him everywhere. His gaze drifting to her when he thought she wasn't looking, his voice lowering when he spoke her name, his shoulders loosening only when he saw she'd made it through the door. Yet beneath the surface, the air carried a tension neither of them addressed. A waiting, a tightening, a quiet fear trying to take shape. On the 4th night, Adrian arrived earlier than usual. Elena saw him through the glass, talking with Luca, movements sharp and clipped, frustration etched in every line of his body. Luca kept checking the windows, the hallway, the cameras. She didn't need to hear the words to feel the weight of them. Something was wrong. She moved quietly, not wanting to draw attention, but Adrian found her anyway. His expression softened instantly, as if her presence steadied something inside him. "You made it," he said, breath easing out as though he'd been holding it. "You said it was safe," she whispered. His jaw tightened. "I want it to be." The rest of the night passed strangely calm, as if the universe granted them a fragile pause. But it didn't ease the unease coiling in her spine. She sensed it in the way Luca lingered near the elevators, in the way Adrian watched every shadow, every sound. And when her shift ended, Adrian walked her all the way down to the service, exit, something he had never done before. His presence felt protective, almost desperate, as if he expected danger around every corner. "Elena," he said quietly just before she stepped into the night, "if anything feels wrong, even the smallest thing, don't come in. Wait for me to reach you." She whispered, "I promise." He let her go, though the hesitation in his eyes made her heart ache. She didn't know it would be the last time he saw her for days. The next night, rain fell hard enough to blur the city lights into silver streaks. Adrian arrived early again, checking the building's security systems with restless focus. Luca followed, tense and silent. But as the clock neared midnight, something shifted, something cold and unmistakable. "Elena should have been here by now," Adrian said. Luca checked the hallway, then the service elevator log. "She hasn't entered the building." Adrian stared at the empty hallway long enough for silence to grow sharp. "She's late," Luca said carefully. "People get delayed." "She's never late," Adrian answered. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the kind of certainty only someone who paid attention could possess. He walked down the hall, pacing once, twice, trying to hide the fear cracking through his composure. Luca's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, eyebrows pulling down. "What?" Adrian snapped. "Boss, the camera's outside her building." Adrian turned sharply. "Show me." Luca hesitated. Adrian's voice hardened. "Show me." They stepped into the office, screens flickering to life with grainy footage. The camera captured the front of Elena's apartment building earlier that evening. She appeared briefly, head down, jacket pulled tight against the rain, keys in hand. Adrian's shoulders eased for a split second. Then another figure appeared in the corner of the frame. A man. Dark hood. Slow, deliberate steps, moving toward her. "Zoom in," Adrian said, voice low and dangerous. Luca obeyed. The man stayed in the frame just long enough for the image to sharpen, tall, broad, with a gait that spoke of intent rather than chance. Elena disappeared inside her building. The man followed, moments later. Adrian's breath stilled. The air became a wire pulled to breaking. "Did she leave the building at all after that?" he asked. Luca swallowed. "No, there's no footage of her coming out." Adrian's face went cold, terrifyingly, absolutely cold. The kind of cold that meant a man had stopped hoping for the best. "Call the team," he said. "Now." Luca hesitated. "Boss." "Now, Luca." Luca moved instantly. Adrian stared at the screen, fists tightening at his sides. His knuckles turned white, the scars along them catching the dim office light like small warnings of all the violence he had survived. He whispered her name, just once, barely audible, but the break in his voice said everything. "Elena." Something inside him cracked open. All the pieces he had held together, all the control he'd maintained, every wall he had carefully built since childhood, shattered. "She didn't just disappear," he murmured. "Someone took her." Luca returned quickly. "The team's assembling. We'll move in 5. Adrian didn't respond. He walked toward the window the bullet had shattered days before, now repaired but not forgotten. Rain streaked down the glass, mirroring the fury gathering beneath his skin. "We warned you they'd try something," Luca said quietly. "Using her." "They won't touch her." Adrian's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Boss." "They won't," he repeated, face hardening. "She's not part of this world. She never should have been dragged into it." Luca hesitated. "Then why did you let her near you?" Adrian didn't look away from the rain-soaked city. "Because she made me want to be someone different." The words hung in the air, raw and painful. Thunder rumbled outside, as if the sky itself sensed the storm building inside him. After a long, heavy moment, Adrian turned to Luca. His eyes were no longer soft, conflicted, or uncertain. They were steel, pure violence sharpened by fear. "We're not waiting 5 minutes," he said. "We move now." "Where do we start?" Adrian's answer was immediate. "Her building." While he gathered his men, Elena lay somewhere unknown, unaware of the chaos her absence had unleashed. Unaware that Adrian was already tearing through the city to find her. Unaware that his world had finally swallowed her whole. But one truth had already taken root in Adrian's heart. If he didn't reach her in time, the warning shot wouldn't be the last. And this time, it wouldn't miss. Snow had begun to fall by the time Adrian reached the outskirts of the city, thin, cold flakes drifting under streetlights like fragile warnings. The roads narrowed into forgotten industrial lanes, the kind of places where law and mercy never bothered to visit. His men followed behind in 2 black SUVs, engines rumbling low, headlights cutting through the dark like impatient beasts. Luca drove beside him, voice clipped with urgency. "We traced the signal from her phone before they tossed it. It pinged near the abandoned warehouse district. East side." Adrian's jaw tightened, a muscle ticking beneath the shadow of his stubble. "East side belongs to them." "And that's why they chose it," Luca replied. "They want you angry." Adrian didn't answer. He was far beyond anger now, moving through something colder, something sharper, something that felt disturbingly close to the boy he used to be. The boy raised by a father who taught him how to survive by becoming every nightmare whispered about in the dark. He thought he'd buried that part of himself. But tonight, it clawed its way back. They stopped near a stretch of abandoned factories, brick walls, crumbling under years of neglect. The wind carried a metallic scent, sharp and wrong. Adrian stepped out of the car before it had fully stopped. Snow clung to his coat instantly, dissolving against the heat of the fury burning beneath his skin. "Boss," Luca said quietly, "they want you to walk into a trap." "I don't care." "You should. That's what they're counting on." Adrian turned his head, eyes like winter steel. "If they hurt her, no one in that warehouse leaves alive." Luca didn't argue again. They moved quickly, slipping through shadows until the warehouse loomed ahead. Its windows shattered, its doors padlocked, but not sealed. Snow thickened around them, muting the world, turning every step into a muffled heartbeat. One of Adrian's men signaled. Footprints. Small ones, Elena's size, fresh, no more than an hour old. And beside them, heavier prints. 2 men, maybe 3. Adrian's breath chilled. He followed the trail until it vanished near the side entrance. A gust of wind carried the faintest echo. Metal clanging, maybe a distant cry, maybe just the settling of old walls. But he felt her, somewhere inside that cold, dying building. He motioned his men forward. They cut the lock silently. The door swung open with a whisper, and a draft of frigid air rushed out, carrying the scent of rust, dust, and dread. Adrian stepped inside first. Always first. Elena drifted between consciousness and darkness, her body aching, wrists bound in front of her. The floor beneath her was freezing concrete, biting into her skin even through her thin coat. She blinked slowly, the dim light above her flickering like a failing heartbeat. A man's voice echoed somewhere behind her, low, mocking, vaguely familiar from that night in the restaurant. "He'll come." Men like Moretti always come, especially when you take something they shouldn't care about. Elena tried to speak, but her throat was raw. Fear had dried her voice to a whisper. She pulled weakly at the zip ties binding her wrists, but they didn't budge. Another voice laughed. "She's trembling, poor girl. Probably didn't even know what she stepped into." Elena closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. She didn't want to be here. She didn't want Adrian to walk into danger because of her. She wanted to go back to her quiet life, her midnight cleaning shifts, her untouched existence. But it was too late. Footsteps echoed suddenly, fast, heavy, controlled. Familiar. The men went silent. Elena's heart surged painfully. "Adrian?" she whispered, though she wasn't sure if the sound reached anyone but herself. Then chaos erupted. A door slammed open. Gunfire cracked through the warehouse like lightning. Not wild, precise, controlled. Adrian's style, cold and fast, each shot measured like a breath. "Get her out!" one of the kidnappers shouted. Too late, another hissed. Something crashed. A struggle. Bodies slamming into crates. More gunfire. A shout of pain. She didn't know whose. Her pulse scrambled. "Adrian!" she cried, louder this time, tears blurring her vision. "Elena!" His voice cut through everything, sharp, desperate, alive. A shadow moved across the floor, then Adrian appeared in the doorway of the small room she'd been held in. Snow clung to his coat, blood streaked across his shirt. His or someone else's, she didn't know. His breath came in heavy bursts, chest rising and falling like a man who'd run through hell. But his eyes were fire and fear and relief all tangled together. He crossed the room in 3 strides, dropping to his knees beside her. "Are you hurt?" His voice cracked. "Elena, look at me. Are you hurt?" She shook her head, sobbing. I'm okay, I'm just..." He pulled her into his arms before she could finish. The warmth of him, the desperate strength of his embrace broke something inside her. She felt his heartbeat against her cheek. Wild, frantic, alive. His hand cupped the back of her head, fingers trembling. "I thought I lost you," he whispered into her hair. "I thought..." His voice faltered. "I can't lose you." She shook against him, clinging to him as if the world around them wasn't collapsing. A movement behind them made Adrian turn sharply, shielding her with his body. One of the kidnappers had stumbled to his feet, blood dripping from his shoulder, gun pointed shakily in their direction. "You think this ends tonight?" the man spat. "You think saving her changes anything? This is only the beginning." Adrian rose, placing himself fully in front of Elena. "You touch her again," he said with a deadly calm that made the air ice over, "and I will end every name tied to yours." The man smirked weakly. "She's your weakness, Moretti. Everyone can see it." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Then you should have aimed for me." One final shot cracked through the air. Luca's, sending the man crashing to the ground. Snow blew in through the shattered side door, swirling around them like ghostly witnesses. Adrian turned back to Elena, kneeling again, gently breaking the ties around her wrists. As he freed her hands, she whispered, voice shaking, "Adrian, you're bleeding." "It's nothing," he murmured, pulling her close. "You're what matters." She leaned into him, her tears warming the collar of his coat. Outside, the snow thickened, covering the world in white. And somewhere between the cold and the chaos, Elena understood one truth. Tonight, Adrian had crossed a line he could never uncross. He hadn't saved her because she was caught in his world. He had saved her because she had become the only part of it he couldn't live without. The sky was only beginning to pale at the edges when Adrian brought Elena back to the city, the snow thinning into faint white dust across the streets. She sat in the passenger seat wrapped in his coat, her wrists bandaged where the plastic ties had bitten into her skin. The car hummed through the early morning quiet, but neither of them spoke. Silence hung between them, heavy, fragile, filled with everything unspoken. She kept her eyes on the road ahead, afraid that if she looked at him, every emotion she was trying to hold back would spill over. Afraid she would crumble. Afraid she would stay. Adrian drove with one hand, the other resting near her as if he wanted to reach for her but wasn't sure he was allowed. His knuckles were bruised, blood dried along the side of his shirt. She had asked 2 times if he was hurt. Both times he murmured it was nothing. Both times she didn't believe him. The moment they reached her street, something tightened inside her, like a thread pulling taut. Her building looked painfully normal. Dark windows, cracked brick, the same broken streetlight flickering above the entrance. It felt wrong that the world could look unchanged when she had not. Adrian parked the car but didn't turn it off. The engine idled softly, filling the cold dawn with warm breath. "Elena," he said quietly. She kept her gaze forward. "You're safe now." She nodded, even though the word felt like an echo of a truth she didn't trust anymore. He waited, watching her closely. "Tell me what you're thinking." She closed her eyes for a moment. The truth scraped painfully inside her. "I'm thinking that I shouldn't go inside." His breath hitched. "Why not?" "Because if I do, you'll think everything is okay, that we can go back to the way things were." She finally looked at him, and the sadness in his eyes nearly undid her. "But we can't, Adrian." He leaned forward slightly. "Elena, you almost died last night. You were covered in blood because of me, because of being near me. I can't—" Her voice caught, splintering. "I can't live like that." He went utterly still, the way he always did when something hit him harder than a bullet. "You're not the reason any of that happened," he said, voice low, steady. "I am." And that's exactly the problem. He flinched. She turned slightly in her seat, bracing herself. "Adrian, your world doesn't just follow you, it consumes everything near you. I saw that last night. I felt it." Her throat tightened. "I can't be pulled into it again. I won't survive it." He looked away, jaw clenching as if he were fighting something inside himself. You think I want this life? You think I want to drag you into it? I think wanting isn't enough to stop it, she whispered. Not when people are sending warning shots through your window. Not when they're watching us in restaurants. Not when they're willing to take me just to get your attention. He bowed his head. She had never seen him look defeated, never seen him look like a man stripped of all his armor. So you're leaving, he said quietly. She shook her head slowly. I'm not leaving the city. I'm leaving the building, the job, and you. He inhaled sharply. Don't say that. You said your past doesn't sleep, she whispered. I believe you. Elena, if I stay, you won't let me go. Her voice trembled. And if I don't leave now, the next warning might not be a warning. He looked at her as though she were breaking something inside him he didn't know how to protect. Do you think letting you walk away is easy for me? He asked softly. No, she said, and that's why I have to be the one to walk. He closed his eyes, his breath thick with pain. Tell me what I need to do. Anything. I'll do it. She swallowed the ache rising in her chest. You can't fix this with promises. Then tell me how to fix it with actions. You can't, she whispered. Not until you leave that world completely. He opened his eyes, and the raw honesty in them sliced through her. I'm trying to walk away, but you haven't. A tear slid down her cheek, and until you do, anyone near you is a target. He reached for her hand on instinct, then stopped an inch before touching her, letting his fingers hover as if the air itself might burn him. Please, he whispered. Don't do this. She looked down at the space between their hands, the space that felt like a valley they couldn't cross. Adrian, she said gently, painfully, you saved my life last night, but I can't let you risk yours for me again. I'm not worth that. He sucked in a breath like she had stabbed him. Don't say that. Don't you ever say that. She pulled her hand into her lap. It's better this way. There's nothing better about this, he said, voice breaking in a way she had never heard. Not for me. The first glow of sunrise touched the horizon, bathing the street in faint gold. A painful, tender quiet filled the car. Two people holding a truth neither of them wanted. Elena, he murmured, one last attempt, one last reach. If you walk away now, I won't know how to protect you if something happens. She offered him a fragile smile that trembled. Then maybe protecting me means letting me go. He looked at her then. Really looked. And she felt every fracture inside him. She reached for the door handle with a shaking hand. The metal felt cold against her skin. Final. Unforgiving. As she pushed the door open, a gust of morning air rushed in, carrying the low hum of distant traffic and the soft hiss of melting snow. Elena, he said again, her name a whisper, a wound, a plea. She paused halfway out of the car. Thank you, she said softly, for saving me, for caring, for everything. He swallowed hard. Is this goodbye? She nodded. For now. His eyes softened in defeat, in heartbreak, in something deeper than either of them was ready to name. Then go before I ask you not to. She stepped out, closing the door gently, quiet enough not to break the moment, but final enough to seal the distance she needed. Adrian didn't drive away immediately. He watched her walk to her building, watched her climb the steps, watched her reach the door. She didn't look back. Because if she did, she wouldn't have the strength to walk away. Only when she disappeared inside did he lean back in the seat, exhaling a shudder that sounded like a man breaking in the hollow of dawn. Sunrise painted the city gold, but for Adrian Moretti, it felt like the color of loss. Days slipped into weeks, and winter deepened around the city, leaving frost on windows and cold breath lingering in the air long after dawn. Elena moved through those days in a quiet haze, waking early, working her morning shifts, returning home before the streets filled with night shadows. She avoided the places where memory might ambush her. She avoided the tall buildings with mirrored glass. She avoided anything that might feel like midnight. She avoided him. But forgetting Adrian Moretti was like trying to forget winter while standing in the snow. He lingered everywhere, in the echo of her footsteps on icy sidewalks, in the warmth of a stranger's coat collar lifted against the wind, in the taste of coffee she now avoided because it reminded her of a storm-lit break room at 2 a.m., and in silence. The silence hurt most. At first, she expected him to call, to message, to knock on her door, to break through the distance the way he had broken through locked doors and dangerous rooms. But Adrian kept his word. He didn't chase her. He didn't appear at her workplace. He didn't disrupt her fragile new routine. Instead, he became an absence that hollowed her nights. Every time the elevator in her apartment building groaned open, she wondered if he might step out. Every time she passed a man in a dark coat, her breath fluttered before settling back into disappointment. Every time she felt watched, not by threat, but by concern, she turned quickly, only to find no one there. Her heart refused to forget him, even as she tried to teach it how. One evening, snow fell heavier than usual, thick and soft, muffling the city beneath a quiet blanket. Eleanor sat on the edge of her bed, feet curled close, staring at the small, bruise-like indentations still faintly marking her wrists. They had almost faded. She wished the same could be said for the imprint he'd left on her heart. She whispered into the stillness, "You're safer without him. You are." The words didn't feel true. They felt like bandages placed over wounds still bleeding beneath. Her eyes fell to her cleaning uniform folded neatly on the chair. She hadn't worn it since that morning in Adrian's car. She didn't have to anymore. Her supervisor had reassigned her to another building. No questions asked. No explanations needed. Not working at his building should have brought relief. Instead, it brought emptiness that stung more than fear ever had. That night, she dreamt of the warehouse, the flickering lights, the cold concrete floor, the sound of her own heartbeat pounding against the air. But in the dream, Adrian didn't arrive. She remained alone, calling his name until her voice fractured. She woke with tears staining her cheeks. By the third week, she realized something truthfully, painfully clear. Distance didn't heal anything. It only highlighted what she had lost, and what she feared she could never regain. Adrian spent those same weeks burying himself in work, violence, meetings with powerful men who offered thinly veiled threats, and long nights staring at the window she once cleaned with quiet concentration. He tried to forget her, failed every time. Her absence pressed against his ribs like a bruise he kept touching, just to feel something other than anger. The crazy part was, everyone noticed. Luca approached him one night, placing a file on his desk. "You're not sleeping," he said. "I'm fine," Adrian replied without looking up. "You're not eating." "Luca, and you haven't smiled in 20 days. Adrian paused mid-signature. Slowly he lifted his eyes. "Boss," Luca said softly, "you went through hell to get her back, and now you're going through hell without her." Adrian didn't respond. He didn't have to. His silence said everything. Luca sighed. "Do you want me to check on her?" "No." Adrian set the pen down, voice low, firm. "She wanted distance. I'll give it to her." "But you're miserable." "I'd rather be miserable than be her reason to hurt again." Luca stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. "You're a good man, Adrian, even if you don't believe it." But Adrian did not feel like a good man. A good man wouldn't have brought danger into her world in the first place. A good man wouldn't have made her tremble with fear. A good man wouldn't have let her walk away with tears in her eyes. He closed his eyes, whispering her name into the empty room, letting it echo off glass and shadows. Elena? It hurt every time. But he let it hurt. Because love, he realized, wasn't about holding on. It was about not dragging someone into the fire with you. On a cold Tuesday evening, Elena returned home from work, snowflakes clinging to her lashes. She reached her apartment door, fumbled with the keys, and noticed something small resting on the floor, leaning against her welcome mat. A letter. Her heart stilled. No one wrote her letters. Her hands shook as she picked it up, the envelope heavy with something that felt like weight and truth. She slipped inside, locking the door behind her, and sat on her bed with the envelope in her lap. There was no name on the front, but she recognized the handwriting instantly. Adrian. Her breath trembled. She opened it carefully as though the paper might shatter. Inside was a single sheet, folded precisely. A faint trace of cologne she remembered from midnight hallways and whispered warnings. She unfolded it with trembling hands. The letter was handwritten, every stroke deliberate, steady, controlled. But the words were anything but. Eleanor, I promised I wouldn't come to you. I promised I'd stay away. But silence feels like punishment for sins I can't undo. I never wanted to be the reason you were hurt, and I never wanted you to live in fear because of me. But the truth is simple. The night I walked out of that elevator, I wasn't escaping my enemies. I was trying to escape the man I was becoming. I thought I was ready to leave that world. I wasn't. Not until I saw you. You made me want a life that doesn't exist for men like me. And I'm sorry for the pain that gave you. You deserve someone who gives you safety without consequence. But if fate ever allows it, if the world ever becomes a place where I can stand beside you without asking you to pay the price, I will find you. Not to pull you into my life, but to give you back everything it took from you. Until then, I'll walk away. But I will not forget. Eleanor pressed a hand to her mouth, a soft sob escaping before she could stop it. Her vision blurred as she read it again, slower this time, absorbing each word as if it were a lifeline she had been drowning without. He wasn't trying to hold on to her. He was trying to become the kind of man who wouldn't break her by staying. Her heart ached with a tender, painful revelation. He had loved her by letting her go. She folded the letter carefully, pressing it to her chest as tears spilled freely. Outside, snow fell like quiet forgiveness. Inside, her heart whispered what distance could not erase. She had not lost him. She had only begun to understand him, and some loves, she realized, cannot be forgotten. Not by time, not by fear, not by distance, not by silence. Because what the heart truly remembers, it remembers forever. 2 months passed before Eleanor allowed herself to step beyond the invisible borders she'd drawn around her life. 2 months of quiet routines, early mornings, and lonely evenings spent rereading a single letter until the ink felt etched into her heart. 2 months of trying to rebuild a world where his shadow didn't linger in every corner. But Adrian's words had settled inside her like a truth she couldn't ignore. If fate ever allows it, I will find you. And fate, it seemed, had grown restless. One late afternoon, as winter softened into early spring, her supervisor called her into the small office of her morning job. "New contract," he said. "They want someone careful, precise, someone who can be trusted with restricted floors." She paused, pen frozen above the clipboard. "Restricted floors?" He nodded. "Corporate offices downtown, a big client. They specifically requested someone with experience working night shifts in high-security buildings. I put your name forward. Her heart kicked hard against her ribs. Downtown. Corporate. High security. For a moment she couldn't breathe. What building? He slid a file across the desk. She hesitated before opening it, fingers trembling. But she knew before she saw the name. Her breath collapsed softly. Moretti Holdings Tower. The world tilted, slowly, quietly, as though reality itself shifted a fraction to the left. She closed the file gently, pulse thrumming like a heartbeat caught in her throat. You don't have to accept, her supervisor said, interpreting her shock as hesitation. It's a lot of pressure. The client is particular. She swallowed hard. I'll take it. Are you sure? Yes, she whispered, unsure of anything except the certainty pressing against her chest. I'm sure. The city felt different when she arrived the night. Alive in a way she hadn't noticed before. The streets shimmering with the rain-washed reflections and the hum of distant traffic. The Moretti Tower loomed above her, tall and glass-sharp, lit from within like a beacon slicing through the dusk. Her breath fogged in the cool air as she approached the entrance. 2 guards stood at the rotating doors. New faces, younger, less weary. They checked her ID, nodded, and let her through. The lobby glowed with warm lighting, but everything felt unfamiliar. The receptionist was different. The floral arrangement had changed. Even the music, soft piano now, felt new. As though the building itself had shed old skin. For a moment, she wondered if he was still here, if he still occupied the top floor, if he still worked late into the night, sleeves rolled up, jaw tight with the weight of worlds he couldn't escape, or if he had disappeared like smoke from a cold room. She stepped into the elevator, heart pounding in a slow, uneven rhythm. Her reflection in the metal doors looked steadier than she felt. Older somehow, stronger around the edges, but with a softness in her eyes that hadn't dimmed. She pressed the button for the 42nd floor, the only floor her badge granted access to. Not his floor, not anymore. But as the elevator ascended, she felt him everywhere, ghosting through her memory like a whisper she didn't know how to silence. The doors opened into a quiet, pristine hallway. A new security camera rotated gently, tracking movement. She felt it pause on her. Her pulse quickened. She began her work carefully, moving through each room with practiced ease. The building was quieter than she remembered. The hum of the air vents steady, the floors polished to a mirror-like shine. But beneath the silence, she felt something else, an undercurrent she couldn't name. A presence. A watching. Not threatening, not hostile, but familiar in a way that tightened her chest. She ignored it and continued, focusing on her routine. Wipe, polish, straighten, breathe. But every few minutes, she felt the weight of unseen eyes following her, not the cameras. Something more human. She told herself she was imagining it. But then, near midnight, as she stepped out of a conference room, she saw a shadow at the end of the hallway. Tall. Still. Silent. Her breath froze. She blinked once, the shadow gone as quickly as it had appeared. Her fingers tightened around the cleaning cloth. She forced herself back into the conference room, needing a moment to gather her thoughts. But then she heard it. A soft, familiar click. The elevator. Her heart leapt and stopped at the same time. She stepped into the hallway just as the elevator doors slid open, and when the figure stepped out, the world slowed to a single point of stillness. Adrian? He looked different. Tired. Older, but achingly familiar. His hair was slightly longer, brushed back in a way that made the angles of his face sharper. He wore a dark coat over simple clothes, not the armor of tailored suits he once lived in. A faint shadow of stubble traced his jaw. But his eyes were the same storm gray that once unraveled her. He stumbled to a halt when he saw her. Elena. The word left him like a breath he'd been holding for months. Her heart clenched painfully. Adrian. He stepped forward slowly, cautiously, as if afraid she might vanish again if he moved too fast. You're here. She nodded, unable to look away from him. I took a new assignment. I know, he said softly. She blinked. You knew? His gaze dropped for a moment, a faint hint of guilt tightening his expression. I didn't request it, but when they told me someone was coming to handle the floor's maintenance, I checked the list. His voice softened. I didn't expect. He stopped, breath catching. I didn't expect it to be you. A fragile quiet hung between them, filled with months of distance and the soft hum of everything unspoken. She swallowed. You look different. So do you? He murmured. I didn't think I'd see you again. I told you, he whispered, stepping closer. I wouldn't come to you unless fate allowed it. Her breath trembled. Did fate allow it, Adrian, or did you? He exhaled, a rough, honest sound. A little of both. They stood inches apart now, close enough for her to feel the warmth of him beneath the winter air conditioning. But he didn't touch her. Not yet. He kept his hands at his sides as if holding back an ocean. Elena, he murmured, voice unsteady. I've been tearing my life apart piece by piece these past months. Cutting ties, ending debts, closing accounts. I'm almost out. The meaning hit her like a heartbeat. You're leaving the Mafia, he nodded slowly. I'm walking away. For good. Emotion swelled behind her ribs, painful and warm. Why? He didn't hesitate. You know why. Tears pricked her eyes, soft and sudden. She shook her head gently. Adrian, I don't know if this changes anything. He inhaled, a small tremor running through him. I didn't come tonight to ask for anything. I just needed to see you. His voice dropped. To know you're okay, to know you're still in the same world as me. Her breath hitched. Seeing you again, he whispered, feels like breathing after being underwater for too long. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, letting his words settle inside her, fragile and dangerous. When she opened them, he was still there, steady, patient, waiting. Adrian, I don't know where we stand. You don't have to. His voice softened with a tenderness that made her chest ache. I'll stand wherever you need me to. She looked at him, a man breaking away from shadows, holding his heart in unsteady hands. Her heart whispered the truth she had tried to bury. She had never truly stopped wanting him, but one step at a time, one breath at a time. She took a slow step closer, and he inhaled sharply as if the world had shifted beneath his feet. Adrian, she whispered, I'm here. His eyes closed for one trembling second. When they opened again, they held something beautiful. Hope. Fragile, trembling, alive. For the first time in months. They stood not as danger and distance, but as two hearts finally returning to the place they had never truly left. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The hallway held its breath, as if afraid a single sound might shatter the fragile closeness forming between them. Elena felt the warmth of Adrian's presence in the cool air, felt his quiet restraint, felt the unspoken question trembling in the space between them. She had taken one step toward him, but there were still miles of fear and memory stretched behind her ribs. He didn't reach for her. He waited, patiently, painfully, eyes searching hers with a vulnerability she'd never known him capable of showing. Eleanor, he whispered, voice low, shaped by months of silence. If this is too much, just tell me. I'll step back. She shook her head slowly. No, don't step back. The relief that flickered across his face was subtle, but unmistakable. She drew a soft breath. You said you're almost out. I am. How close? He hesitated, and she could see him choosing honesty over comfort. Close enough to burn bridges, not close enough to sleep safely. Her heartbeat quickened. Adrian! He took a slight step toward her, though still careful to keep a respectful distance. Elena, listen to me. I cut ties with everyone who ever had leverage over me. I closed accounts that funded things I'm not proud of. I walked away from alliances that would have protected me, because they also chained me. His voice deepened. All that's left is one last meeting, one last name I have to sever. And then? And then, he exhaled, I'm free. She searched his eyes, needing to see the truth there. She found it, raw, exhausted, but unwavering. And you're doing all of this because of me? She whispered. He shook his head. I'm doing it because of us. The words slipped through her like a soft tremor, but her thoughts tangled with fear. Adrian, what if this isn't enough? What if leaving them just paints a target on you, on anyone near you? That's why I chose the hard way out, he said gently. The one that doesn't involve running. The one that forces them to accept I'm done. Will they? She asked. His jaw tightened. They have no choice. She absorbed his words, the weight of them settling inside her like a truth she wasn't sure she wanted but couldn't deny. He was fighting for a life outside of darkness, one he had never been allowed to imagine before her. But the cost of that life might still echo into their future. She stepped back slightly, trying to find steady breath. Adrian stayed still, watching her with a softness that contradicted every sharp edge of his past. Elena, he murmured, tell me what you're thinking. I'm thinking. She paused, feeling her voice catch. I'm thinking I don't know how to fit into this new life you're fighting for. I don't know who I'm supposed to be now. You don't have to be anything except yourself. But what if that isn't enough? It's everything, he said, the certainty in his tone grounding her. When I was drowning in a world built on fear, you were the only thing that felt real. The only thing I wanted to keep. Her breath trembled. I'm scared, Adrian, of losing you, of losing myself, of wanting something I'm not brave enough to ask for. He stepped closer, not touching, just close enough for her to feel the warmth of him like a promise. Then let me be brave for both of us tonight. A tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. He gently reached out, pausing just before his fingers brushed her skin. A silent question. When she didn't pull back, he touched her cheek lightly, reverently, his thumb brushing away the tear. His touch was warm, cautious, almost fragile. It pulled a soft breath from her lips. Elena, he whispered, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for promises. All I'm asking is for a chance. Her chest ached. A chance for what? A chance to choose you, he murmured, in a world where I finally can. The words wrapped around her, heavy and tender. She closed her eyes briefly, letting them sink into every wound she'd carried these past months. When she opened them again, Adrian was watching her with a hopeful stillness. She shook her head faintly. I don't know how this ends. I don't either, he admitted, but I'm willing to find out, and I won't walk away this time unless you ask me to. Silence settled between them, a silence filled with heat, longing, and the quiet rhythm of two hearts finding courage in the same breath. Adrian, she whispered, voice trembling, what if fate doesn't forgive us? Then we'll choose each other anyway. The resolve in his voice sent a shiver through her. She didn't know if it was fear or hope anymore. Maybe both. A soft click echoed down the hallway, the sound of the elevator arriving again, breaking the fragile stillness. Luca stepped out, phone in hand, expression tight. "Boss," he said, noticing Elena and lowering his voice. "It's time." Adrian turned, the shift in him immediate, a steeliness settling over his features, the old command in his posture returning like instinct. But when he looked back at her, the softness returned instantly, grounding him in a way nothing else could. "Elena," he said quietly, "that meeting I told you about, it's happening tonight." Her breath caught. "You're going now?" He nodded. "This is the last piece, the last thread." She swallowed, fear twisting inside her chest. "Adrian, what if—" He stepped close again, gently taking her hand for the first time since they'd reunited. His fingers intertwined with hers, warm, steady, deliberate. "This is a choice I'm making in the dark," he whispered. "But I'm making it for the light I want with you." Her eyes stung. "Come back," she whispered. "If you're choosing me, come back." His thumb brushed across her knuckles. "I will. But promise me." "I promise." Luca cleared his throat softly. "Boss." Adrian released her hand slowly as though separating from her required physical effort. His eyes held hers a moment longer, unspoken vows woven into the quiet beat of his breath. "I'll return," he said softly. "And when I do, we'll see where fate takes us." She nodded, heart pounding. "I'll be here." He gave her one last look, one that carried everything he couldn't say, before turning and walking toward the elevator with Luca. As the doors began to close, he kept his gaze locked with hers until the last sliver of the gap vanished, leaving her standing in the quiet hallway. Alone. Waiting. Hoping. Afraid. Because tonight, Adrian Moretti walked into the dark to make the final choice that would define the rest of his life. And Elena could only pray that he would return to her before the night stole him away. The night Adrian walked away felt endless. Elena stood in the quiet hallway long after the elevator doors closed, listening to the hum of the building as if it might tell her he was safe. It didn't. It only echoed her heartbeat, fast, uncertain, tangled with fear and hope. She returned to her work, but her hands trembled so badly she had to retry simple tasks, wiping the same surface twice, polishing glass that was already clear. Every shadow felt too still, every sound too sharp, every second too slow. She left the building only when morning softened the sky with pale lavender, her eyes heavy with sleeplessness and her heart carrying a weight she didn't know how to set down. The hours passed quietly. And then, as the sun settled low again, as the city dipped into dusk, Adrian returned. He waited outside her apartment building, leaning against an old stone pillar, snow melting into the collar of his coat. He looked exhausted. Dark circles beneath his eyes, a bruise on his cheek, the faint stiffness of someone who'd fought more than one battle in a single night. But he was standing. And he was breathing. And when he saw Elena approaching down the walkway, his posture softened like a storm settling into calm. She stopped a few feet from him, breath catching. "Adrian." He straightened slowly. "I told you I'd come back." She took in every detail of him, the weariness, the quiet pain, the relief flickering through his eyes. "You're hurt." "I'm here," he corrected gently. "That's what matters." She closed the distance between them in 3 trembling steps, her hands rising instinctively to touch his face, lightly, reverently, as if afraid he might crumble under her fingers. He leaned into her touch without a single protest. "You kept your promise," she whispered. "I kept the one that mattered." "What happened?" He exhaled a slow breath. "The meeting was final. It took hours, words, threats, and reminders of what I was capable of. But in the end, they understood." His gaze held hers, soft but unyielding. I'm done with them. Permanently. Her heart trembled with something deep and overwhelming. They won't come after you. No, he said. Not anymore. And they won't come after me? A shadow flickered across his eyes, but he answered truthfully. No. She let out a breath she'd been holding for months. Adrian reached for her hand slowly, offering his palm rather than taking hers. A silent choice. A silent question. Elena, he murmured, I don't know what comes next. I don't know who I am without the world I walked away from. But I know who I want beside me while I figure it out. Her throat tightened with emotion. And who is that? You, he said simply. If you'll have me. There was no hesitation in her heart, only a warmth she'd been afraid to acknowledge. She slid her hand into his, fingers weaving with his in a way that felt like home. I'm here, she whispered. If you want this, I want it too. Something in him softened. His chest rose and fell in a shaky breath, relief loosening the rigid lines of his posture. For the first time since she met him, Adrian Moretti looked like a man stepping into light instead of out of it. Come on, he said gently. Let's go home. Home turned out to be nothing extravagant. An old mechanic's shop he'd inherited from an uncle. The top floor converted into a modest apartment he'd been renovating slowly in secret. Wooden beams stretched across the ceiling, dust motes glimmering in the warm light. A small couch sat beneath the window. A tiny kitchen held mismatched dishes and a battered kettle. Paint cans lined one wall. Tools lay scattered across a workbench. It was imperfect, unpolished, but real, and safe. He watched her reaction carefully. It's not much yet, but I wanted something honest to build from. It's perfect, she said softly. Adrian stepped inside, setting down his coat and unlocking the window to let fresh air in. I'm working in the shop downstairs during the day, fixing cars, learning normal. It's different. Do you like it? She asked. He paused and smiled, a real quiet smile that softened every sharp edge. I do. Eleanor moved closer, brushing fingers along a wooden beam as she took everything in. I never pictured you somewhere like this. He chuckled softly. Neither did I. But peace feels less impossible here. She felt a warmth spread inside her. I'm glad. He reached out, gently tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Stay with me tonight. Her breath fluttered. Not because I'm asking you to choose us, he continued softly, but because I want you to see the life I'm choosing. She nodded. I'd like that. He brewed tea in the dented kettle, and they sat on the small couch, knees touching, sharing warmth in the quiet space between lamplight and dark windows. He told her about the last meeting, how hard it was, how close it came to violence, how Luca stood by him like a brother, how he walked away without looking back. She told him about the weeks she spent healing, how lonely it was, how much she missed him, how she finally understood what it meant to lose someone without losing love. They talked until their voices grew soft, until the city lights dimmed, until the weight of the world settled into peace around them. At some point, Elena rested her head on Adrian's shoulder. He hesitated only a moment before resting his cheek against her hair, his arm curling gently around her. She felt his heartbeat, steady, slow, warm, and the sound soothed every part of her still wounded by memory. The quiet held them like a promise. When dawn brushed faint gold across the window, Eleanor stirred slightly. Adrian's voice reached her in a sleepy whisper. Eleanor? He pressed a soft kiss to her forehead. Thank you for coming back. She smiled against his chest. Thank you for finding your way back to yourself. They stayed like that, two tired souls breathing the same quiet morning, until sunlight seeped across the floor, filling the room with warmth. And in that gentle stillness, Elena understood something she had been too afraid to believe. Love wasn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it was found in quiet hours, in whispered truths, in the warmth of a hand holding yours through the dark. Sometimes it was found in choosing each other, every single day. And somewhere in the quiet between heartbeats, love began again,